All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Gianna Gray. I'm an admission counselor here at Center College. I'm joined today by Dr. Sara Egge, and I'll let her introduce herself in a minute. But Dr. Egge, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm delighted to chat with you. Welcome to our faculty. It's not Friday, but it is along the lines of our Faculty Friday sort of series. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Would you mind sharing a short introduction about where you grew up, where you went to school, so your primary areas of study, and then your role at Center to begin a conversation?
Sure. Well, I'll just introduce myself in terms of what I do here. I am Dr. Sara Egge, and I am the Claude D. Pottinger Professor of History. And I teach U.S. history, and so lots of different topics in that. Primarily, I focus on environmental history, kind of rural agricultural history, and then also I do a lot of women and gender history. And then particular period of time is sort of after the Civil War, kind of through the 20th century. So any courses that sort of factor into those places, and those time periods, that's what I do. But I'm actually originally from South Dakota. There are not that many people from South Dakota in general. And so whenever I tell people that, I love to see the reactions that people have. And then I usually, if I'm teaching a class and I say this, I'll say to the students, how many of you have been there? And I might get a couple of hands. And I'm like, okay, that's great. So I grew up in South Dakota in the southeastern corner, right along the Missouri River. And it's a gorgeous area of the country. And my hometown was just lovely. And I was pretty isolated in some ways, just in turn, like I grew up on a farm actually, so physically like I was outside of town, but also, South Dakota, we just sort of get passed over, and there's just not a lot of attention to the state and the people there. And so I think that shaped me in some ways, just to think about what stories we tell and and whose identities or whose values get promoted. I don't know, to me, even as a little kid, I was always kind of curious about my position in the world. And so when I graduated high school, I wanted to go somewhere far away, but not too far away. And so I went to North Dakota. Fun. I know. But I went to North Dakota State University. I got a couple scholarships, which sweetened the deal. And it was far enough away. It felt like it was outside the state and gave me some distance, but it was still close enough that I could drive home relatively easily. And so that's in Fargo, North Dakota. And again, lots of ideas about what Fargo is, but it's also a really lovely town. Kind of at the time it was up and coming. Now it's grown tremendously. And so when I went to college, I had no idea what I wanted to major in. I actually started as an undecided major. So one of the things I love about Center is that you don't declare major till your sophomore year, which I think is great, because I totally would have loved that, because everybody was like, well, what's your major? And I'm like, I don't know. I like a lot of different things. And so it was really the spring term of my freshman year. I was kind of taking a lot of different courses, and I took this U.S. history, women's history course. And I thought, well, this is fun. I like this. I like storytelling, and I like to know why things are the way they are. And the thing that always strikes me is it's not simple, right? It's really complicated. And so that really kind of got me thinking that I could major in history and then hopefully do something with that. And so really it was my senior year as an undergrad that I started to actually think, like, what am I going to do with this degree in history? I also added a Spanish major, and I studied abroad in Spain, which was really exciting.
Awesome.
For, again, a small town girl and a rural upbringing to travel abroad was a lot of fun. And so I thought really hard about what it was I wanted to do, if I wanted to get a job or if I wanted to try to do something more. And so I had a really wonderful mentor who's now at Rollins College, actually. At the time she was at NDSU. And she said, well, why don't you take a class with me? It'll be an independent study, but I'll run it like a grad school class, so you can actually see what it's like. And she said, what would you like to take? And I said, well, let's do women's history. And let's look at the women's suffrage movement. It was something that I liked learning about. And what had struck me at the time was that there was so little about women's suffrage, in particular in the Midwest and among rural women, that I thought, I want to know if there's really more to this. So I took that course, and that pretty much set me up. I was like, yeah, I want to do this in grad school. So I applied, and I ended up going to Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. So very Midwestern. I'm just sort of moving in a little weird circle around the Midwest. And I decided to do a program in agricultural and rural history, but with a focus on gender and women's history. And that was really where I was able to then do research into the women's suffrage movement in rural America, focusing specifically on the Midwest. And I'll never forget my wonderful advisor. Her name is Dr. Pamela Riney Kerberg. She's still there and still doing great work. I went and sat down with her one of the first meetings we had, and I said, so I want to do I want to study women's suffrage in the Midwest, and I want to look at rural America. And she said, well, good luck with that. She said, nobody's really done it before, and we don't even know if there's a lot of sources. I don't, as a historian, you need primary sources to do your work. And so she was very supportive, though. She said, here's the things I would do to get started. But she also sort of said, you have to really be prepared if what you hope to find isn't out there. So I'm a little bit of stubborn, I would say, dogged spirit here. And so I thought, I'm gonna figure this out. And so I did. I went to archives, spent a lot of time looking at archives. I read a lot of newspapers. And I uncovered what I found was just this incredible history. And it became ultimately my first book, which was published a couple years ago. And so it's this kind of thing where what I like to tell students even now is that if you kind of find that thing as an undergrad that you just can't stop thinking about, that's a good sign that it's something you can continue to pursue after, whether you go to graduate school or whatever you want to do, a professional school or getting a job. To me, that was something that really inspires me to sort of think about what it is, even as an 18 or 19-year-old, can really shape your life moving forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we might have an incoming first year from South Dakota this year, actually, or either North or South Dakota. So either a student is already there from South Dakota and we're getting one from North Dakota, or vice versa.
I love that. Yes.
So maybe you'll have them in your class.
Great. Yes. Yeah. No, I have not had a student from South Dakota or North Dakota in any of my classes so far. So I would love to see them. Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Awesome. Now, flashback, if you will, when you realized you wanted to be a college professor specializing in history. So when did you have that aha moment? You talked a lot about the sort of work that you've done, but when did you really know that you wanted to become a college professor?
So I knew I wanted to do something in terms of like if I could research or if I could continue to pursue my education beyond an undergrad. But to actually be a professor, that I think took a little bit more thinking on my part. And I actually think it took my professors telling me, hey, this is something you could do. You have, some skills here. You've got some abilities that you could continue to develop. And so the professor I had, she was one of them, but there were probably 3 or 4 others at NDSU who really sort of helped me in conversation figure out that this was something I really wanted to do. And there was another professor when I then went to graduate school. In some ways, you go to graduate school and that's kind of the idea that you have, that you want to be a professor. But there's also opportunities outside of being a professor that you could pursue as well. So I was sort of open-minded. But I had a lot of conversations with our graduate advisor for the graduate program, a guy named Dr. Michael Bailey. And he really also kind of sat me down and said, like, here's the things you could really be thinking about in terms of being a professor. And I don't know if it was an aha moment, but it was just a lot of those kinds of conversations that got me to that point where it was, yeah, like, I want to do this. I like all that it entails. And knowing that I could do research and I can teach. I tell my students, I get to like talk about history. I get to kind of be a nerd. I get to like, be my authentic self every day in a job that rewards me for that. Like, some jobs you have to just kind of plod along and do your work, but I get to be this. I do this in class all the time. And my students comment on constantly, like, you're just so enthusiastic. I'm like, yeah, because I love what I'm doing. I love telling these stories and I love debating about the past. And I love going over these sources and trying to figure out why people did what they did. And so that to me, that moment sort of crystallizing over time I still think about it, and I still appreciate all those people who helped me get here.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's the way it should be, right? You want to be excited about what you're doing every day. And I think that gets other people excited about it, especially your students. Like, you want
Mhm.
students to be sort of excited about what they're learning about. And maybe you can inspire your students to also follow in your footsteps. So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I think too that sometimes, not all, but sometimes students have a negative impression of history. They think that it's boring. They think they tell me this, that it's just a bunch of facts and dates, and it's like people who just drone on and on. And so one of the best moments I have every time I teach a course is when students are sort of like their eyes are open and like, oh, this is what history is? You mean I get to talk about these things and do these things, and I get to and I get to hear you tell these stories, and I just, that's the part where I'm like, yeah, that's what history is. It's engaging. It's incredibly challenging at times. It strikes at some deep, like, philosophical questions about who we are and why we do what we do, our relationships to other people, to the environment, to political institutions, and whatever. I just think that those are the kinds of things that when students can sort of see that, those moments are just precious.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're talking a lot about your students, but what were you like as a college student? So how would you describe your undergraduate self?
Well, so I already have outed myself as a nerd. Um, and so I was totally, I loved school. I just loved it. I thought that this was, if I could just do this forever, it's probably one of the other reasons I could just continue to pursue academia. But so in high school, what saved me is I also played sports. I'm pretty sure that otherwise I would have been like the kid at the nerd table that just read a lot of books all the time. But I played volleyball, and for a little while I played basketball, and then I played softball. So I had enough connections. I was I was nerdy, but I was like, oh, it's okay. And it's high school, right? So there's cliques, and it's small town. Everybody knows everybody. And then when I got to college, I was like, oh, people don't like, people just want to like talk to me about the ideas I have, and they want to just like value what I have to say, and how I might contribute. And it doesn't matter the connections I necessarily have, like I had to maybe be more attentive to in high school. And so I was just like, this is amazing. I was quiet, not like I can do the talk a lot and engage a lot now. I was the kid that sat in the class and like I always had the answer, but I was like, oh, I can't answer every question. I can't do it. But I loved my classes. I never missed class. Like I was just like, this is the greatest thing. Why would anyone want to skip class? Oh, I sound like such a, I don't know, a goody two shoes or
It's
so.
okay. It's okay.
But I did. I thought that college was so great, and if I could continue, maybe, like on the other side as a professor, but if I could continue to do this, I just thought it was great. So yeah, so I loved it. I thought college was fun. Of course, did I read every word I was assigned? No, but I did genuinely enjoy what I was doing and what I was learning. So that was great.
That's great. I think Center's sort of one of our goals is to set students up to be excited about being a lifelong learner. So the
Mm.
fact that you have this passion for learning and always learning more is great. And we're again lucky to have a sort of professor that can inspire students like that. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, I recently saw a news story on the book that you read or wrote about women's suffrage. So could you talk a little bit more about that book and your work on that? You mentioned it a little bit, but can you expand a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you the briefest explanation I can on this long book that I wrote. I will say that this is a very fortuitous moment because it is the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment in 2020.
Wow.
2020 has been a lot of things for a lot of people, but it is also an anniversary year. So in some ways, I bring that up because I think people think like, wow, oh, 100 years ago, that's amazing, great. But then I also want to turn it and say, yes, only 100 years.
Not that
You know,
long.
not that long. The other part of this, of course, is that the 19th Amendment did not enfranchise all women. So it was primarily white middle class women who were enfranchised, but large numbers of women, racial, ethnic, religious, other affiliations or identities were discriminated against and kept out of the vote. But it does mark a legal moment in terms of legal history where women in the Constitution had the right to vote. So it's important. And then we can unravel it. So in my book, I look at the Midwest. I look at 3 states, Iowa, South Dakota, and Minnesota. And I compare the fight for women's suffrage in these 3 states. And then I chose to compare because it's so different. Even though these states border each other, the populations are pretty similar. The messages about why women wanted the right to vote in each state were pretty similar. The way it actually happened was completely different. And so state politics is really important, and local politics, in fact. So for example, in Minnesota, there was really no movement. It was very, very slow. It emerged in a more robust form after about 1914 with some new leadership. And so that's remarkably different than, say, South Dakota, that had 7 campaigns to secure a women's suffrage amendment. So these 2 states that border each other had incredibly different experiences. I think that's an important thing to note, that even then when we think about the outcomes of women's suffrage, even the process by which women became enfranchised was markedly different. What I found overall, a couple conclusions. The first one is that women in this area did not necessarily argue for the ballot out of a sense that they're equal to men. That was a very controversial and even radical or dangerous argument to make. And to us, again, that sounds maybe a little disconcerting. Why would you not say that women are equal? At the time, though, in this particular place, making that argument did not win you votes, not enough. So instead, these women, they read the landscape of the Midwest and the politics there, and they said, we don't necessarily need the ballot because we're equal, because we're citizens, because we're responsible, and we've demonstrated our responsible citizenship in our communities. And they did. They built lots of institutions. They raised lots of money for different initiatives in these communities. I basically say that they were the public officials before public officials existed in a lot of these places. They were sort of overseeing a lot of the community activities that maybe your city council or your mayor would do. In the Midwest, these were up and coming communities of white settlers, of course. And so they were definitely doing a lot more work, and then they could translate that into a case for why they deserve the right to vote. Again, not necessarily because they're equal, but because they're responsible. The other part of this that I really focus on is the fact that at the same time that these women are advocating for the right to vote, they are also seeing a huge number of immigrants coming to this area, mainly from Europe, Northern European countries, Germany and Norway and Sweden, other countries in that area. And these immigrants are not necessarily interested in assimilation, and because they're settling in a pretty rural, remote place, not a lot of infrastructure development at this point in the late 19th century, they can really sort of preserve their ethnic identities. So this is a problem because these immigrants in many of these states, so in South Dakota and Minnesota, not in Iowa, but in these 2 states, these immigrants could vote before they became citizens.
Oh.
Which is right. Like people are like, wait, what? Yes, the United States has a history of allowing immigrants to vote before they become citizens. It's a process, or it's a kind of a legal-ish thing called alien suffrage or declarant suffrage, but it basically allowed these immigrants to vote. So they can participate politically, but they can also maintain their ethnic identities. For a while, this is okay, but by World War I, this is a major issue. We see a rise of nativism, anti-immigrant sentiment, and it's particularly directed at these immigrant groups in the Midwest. And the key to unlocking all this is that suffragists, they're sick and tired of waiting for the right to vote. Their argument has been developed about that they're responsible citizens, and so it's kind of perfect for them to say, we're responsible citizens, and these German, in particular, it's World War I, Germany's the enemy, they are not responsible. In fact, we think that they're traitors. We think that they're domestic terrorists, some are even saying this, that are living in our midst. So it's very inflamed, it's very fraught and contentious during World War I, but it's what the suffragists in the region use to demand the right to vote. and it works. They in fact take this idea, like they're responsible citizens, and they say we're loyal citizens. Responsible equals loyal, and loyalty and patriotism in World War I was really important, right?
Smart approach.
Yeah. So it's this whole other area that I was able to bring out of the suffrage movement. Not a lot of people had talked about ethnicity or immigration and women's suffrage. And so I was really pleased to be able to bring that into the scholarship, but then also just to shine a light into how rural people living in the Midwest were able to create their identities and then ultimately make this argument about why women should have the right to vote. So, yeah.
And that was only 100 years ago. Like, that is so wild.
I know. It's definitely, and it's 100 years ago for the 19th Amendment, but it's even less time when you think of other people of color, marginalized communities.
Right.
I think of Indigenous Americans, Native Americans didn't become citizens until 1924, right? So there's a lot of, when we think about voting rights, there's a lot of people for whom voting rights were non-existent for a really long time.
It's so wild to me. And you said there wasn't much writing on this when you were sort of studying it and everything. So now you can be the source for a lot of people.
Well, I've been involved in a couple documentaries and a couple of podcasts and a couple of just different things because it is the anniversary year. And there has been renewed interest in this idea of voting and citizenship. And what does it mean to be a good citizen? What does that look like? And even now, I think we still are asking that question in different ways, in different contexts.
Yeah. And that leads me to my next question. So can you sort of tell us about your work to answer that question, like what it means to be a citizen or a good citizen?
Well, it's actually a really hard question to ask answer, because in part it's changed so much. The assumptions we have about who can even be a citizen. At one point in our history, in 1857, the Dred Scott decision said that all African American enslaved persons were not citizens, that they were in fact property. I mean, how do you even talk about citizenship when we basically, at one point in our history, told a group of people that they don't even count as humans? I mean, just so all that is to say, we really have to think about the kind of historical legacies that have informed our ideas about citizenship. I spend a lot of time talking about issues of race, gender, religion, sexuality that really limited the number of people who could become citizens. But then we also, I think a lot about what are the things that we expect, at least in the United States. One of the biggest things that we look at, and again, this is a long tradition of thinking about citizenship, is we expect people to contribute in some way. Now we put parameters on that. For a long time, people thought it could only be white male property owners who had the capacity to contribute, and that has expanded over time. But at the core, that contribution is key, because the other part of this is that there's some sort of relationship then between the people and the government. So if you can contribute, then you can then contribute to that relationship between the people and the government. So what we do, and what I love when I think about citizenship is, again, we get these really major questions about what does it mean to live in a democracy? What are the rights that citizens have? And what protections do they have? What is that relationship then? What does the government grant? What does the government do? And then what do the people demand, right? And what happens when there's problems? What happens when there's inequalities? How do people address those? And so when we think about citizenship, there are these sort of core ideas, but there's also inconsistencies at every level. Because when we see about all the people who've been disenfranchised or been denied citizenship, we have to then think about if the tenets on which we value citizenship and we define citizenship are themselves fraught and themselves undefined, then we've got sort of even more than just complexity. We have inconsistency, in fact, that really marks a lot of our citizenship historically.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you, when we start digging into it, I like just seeing the kind of processing that takes place. I went through it when I was getting into this field, just to think about how we've developed these systems out of half-formed ideas, or about ideas that were created at a time where maybe only 20% of a population could actually be counted as citizens or actually contribute as citizens, it's really quite striking.
Yeah. And I think we emphasize so much like making a great global citizen at Center, making our students really passionate about global citizenship. So I think, I mean, I'm really glad that history is part of our general education requirements. And I know that is expanding or sort of adding more flexibility with the changes that we're going to make to our gen eds. But I definitely think this work is important. And if we're sending students out to study abroad and things like that, but we really don't know what citizenship means in our own country, like it's really interesting to study. So yeah, that's awesome. I can see why you're a history nerd.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I think mobility, the ability to move is a right in some ways. And so the fact that we send and can send students abroad, it's wonderful. But when you put it in that framework of, for some people, movement is not an option. Mobility is curtailed. So then we can have even more layered discussions about what study abroad really means and the ability people have to do it or not do it. So
Right.
I think it's a wonderful way to like do the work, but then also interrogate the very approaches and foundations of that work. And that's something that I don't just do this at Center, lots of people do this at Center. And I think it's just a huge benefit that students have when they get to come here, is to see that kind of work that we're doing, that kind of intellectual engagement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, when you were exploring faculty positions, what sort of drew you to Center and the Center community?
Yeah, so I went to big public schools, and I think that they're great. They serve wonderfully, great faculty there. But one of the things that drew me to Center was that the relationships I could have with my students were much more intimate and connective and frequent and
For
meaningful.
sure.
My very first course as an undergraduate was a psych intro course, and it was great. I learned a lot, but I took the course with about 250 other students.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
So again, studious me, I'm sitting in like the front row. I got all my stuff. I was like in it, but I could see where some of those kids in the back row, and they're on their laptop and they're not paying attention. Like no one's really there to engage with them. And it's this kind of thing where, as I looked for opportunities to be a professor, Center was so attractive, because I knew that I could be in that classroom and I could be so many feet away from a student. And if I saw them kind of wandering, their attention was going somewhere else, I could engage with them directly. The other thing I really love, and this was something I didn't totally get at the time, people kind of talked to me about it, but now that I'm here, I get it, is that not only do I see students in class and I get to know them that way, but I see them outside of class all the time. And I love that. I love the fact that they get to know me, as I've got two little kids, so they see my little kids sometimes running around campus or in other places in the community. And so they get to like see me as a whole person in a way that I hope that I am seeing them as whole people. And so that's something that I understood coming to a small liberalized college was something I would get to experience. But now that I do experience, I can't even hardly put into words how priceless that is.
Yeah. I mean, the accountability aspect of you have to go to class prepared, your professor can see you at all times. I
Yeah.
don't know if I mentioned I was a center grad at the beginning, but
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
at 2018, in 2018. So that was a huge sort of benefit, I think, going to a small liberal arts school, because I knew I had to be on it at all times. But also, it was really nice just to see my professors out. I mean, I'd go to like the gym and they would be there, and I'm like, oh, you work out too? Like, that's so cool. I think sometimes it's easy to forget that professors, have a life outside of the classroom. So it's really good that you're able to relate to your students that way, for sure.
Yeah.
How would you describe the academic culture of Center?
So I find it to be really lively and engaging, and I think about it in my position, I have faculty colleagues who are doing the most amazing things. And we have a number of opportunities to hear about what other people are doing, whether it's in their classrooms or in their own research or scholarship. And so I am constantly just energized when I get to interact with my colleagues on this daily basis and think and see what they're doing. We also, one of the things I love is we are really intentional about the people we bring in. So for convocations, the kinds of speakers we get, I have to admit, having 2 little kids, I haven't had as much evening time to engage with the convocations as I'd like. But before I had kids, and then as they're getting older, I'm able to engage with guest speakers and top people in their fields, and they just come in and I'm just blown away.
Mhm.
And what I love then, this is the third part of this, is that I can talk with my students about this, and it's like adds another layer and another dimension to what we're talking about in class. And so it's this like, I don't know how to, like, I have this image of my head of like something that's like growing and growing, and it's just energy. It's like I don't know, a battery, and it's just like pulsing, like, because that's how I feel when I'm on campus. It's like, I could walk around a hallway and there's someone and they're like, oh, how's your whatever going? And they're like, well, I'm doing this and this. And I leave that conversation just like, whoa, like that's amazing. So that, to me, the intellectual vibrancy of Center is so great. The other thing I think, especially for students who are coming in, like, you are invited into that. Like, you don't just like sort of sit on the sidelines. You're like, well, I'm new, so I'll just sort of maybe passively listen or something. It's like, no, you're in. Like,
Time for that.
and I love that. There's not these like barriers or these levels, like hierarchies of like, well, you're this, so you can't do that. Like, no, people are like, we know that you are here and you're excited and we are too. Like, we're all in this. And that's something I really love about Center, is that you are welcome, you are part of this community, and that's something I really value. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the transition from high school to college, I mean, it can bring a lot of anxiousness and sort of, well, college is so hard and things like that. But I think when you really get your students excited about learning and, so, like you said, invite them into that sort of vibrant learning experience,
Mm-hmm.
it makes the transition a lot easier. So, yeah, nothing to worry about for first years.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, it's one of my favorite. Actually, it's one of my favorite things to do, is to teach kind of like an introductory course or survey course, and you have a good number of first years or all first years. Those are so fun because there is this kind of like, oh, am I going to do this right? And it's like, oh, you got this, right? And you start to see those steps being taken, analytical steps, and they're starting to make connections. And then someone says something, and I'm just like, that was great. Like, I love that. I just think that to see that progress and have that kind of personal relationship that you're building, that fulfillment, I see it on the student side where they're just like, wow, like I'm doing this. But then as the faculty, to like be that sort of a guide or just to facilitate, give the students the opportunity to do that. That's it right there.
Cool. So what should students know about your department and the opportunities for potential majors and minors?
Well, I would say 2 things. The first is that our major is very flexible, and it's open. We have no prereqs, which I think for some people are like, wait, you have no prereqs? But I know. But in part, we certainly have scaffolded courses. So we don't advise students to take the most upper level class in their first term. But what that does is allow for flexibility. We find a lot of our students study abroad or do internships, or they'll major or minor in something else. And that flexibility and not having to be kind of in a rigid way directed through a major allows for our history majors to really expand and experience a lot of the wonderful opportunities that Center has. So it's not that we don't have scaffolding. We do. We make sure that students progress through our major in a very focused way. But again, it gives us that flexibility to engage. The second thing I would say about our history program is that we expect students from the first course they take to the last course they take as history majors or minors, is that they do the work. They do the work that it is that historians do. And in particular, we infuse research into our courses, and I think a pretty great way, in a dynamic way. Students are analyzing primary sources, they're reading secondary sources, they're building historiographies, They're coming up with original theses and arguments and ideas. And to me, that is a hugely beneficial skill, no matter what you end up doing, to take evidence, marshal it together, come up with a key message or a key argument and articulate that clearly. Those are skills that we hear from employers all the time that are so valuable. Our employers are constantly coming to us and saying, your history majors can write clearly, can articulate their thoughts clearly, can build a logical case for a rationale of why we ought to do something or why we ought to consider something. And so those are the skills that we practice with every class. And so to me, those are the two things of many things that set apart history as a really dynamic and vibrant major.
Yeah, I'm like rethinking or reconsidering, should I have majored in history? I was a Spanish major. We didn't have the flexibility of like you can really, there's no prereqs for the major and things like that. But yeah, this is so cool. I didn't know about all of this. So
Yeah. Well, it allows you a level of choice that you might not get necessarily. It's not to say that, I mean, I think there is a degree that you need to sort of, your faculty have sort of said, no, here's what you need to do. But at the same time, what I think is so great is that our students, if they really love a particular area, if it's Asian history, you can take more than one course with Dr. John Harney. He's fantastic. And like you could do that, or African history, Dr. John Earl. I mean, so my colleagues were all bringing something to the table, and so we have breadth in our major and flexibility in that. But then there's also ways that you can really emphasize those geographies or those topics that you find most compelling. So it's great. I think what I love too is like I talk with potential majors about this, and when they actually look at it, they're like, I love this. This is great. So yeah, history it's really fun. Yeah.
Wow. You mentioned you enjoy teaching the entry level sort of history classes, but would you say that is your favorite course to teach, or what is your favorite course to teach and why?
Yeah. So I don't know if I can actually pick one because I love all of them. This is really hard. I love teaching first years. It's just great to see their transformations and their changes that they're going through as they're becoming college students. I will say that one of my favorite courses, it's a center term course I've taught a couple times. It's called Haunted American History.
Ooh,
And
I think I've heard of this one.
yeah, I think it's getting a reputation. So people think that it's just us telling ghost stories and scaring each other, which is kind of, but no, we're looking at why we are interested in these haunted places. So it's place, like why are certain places haunted, or why do they have these reputations as being haunted? So then we look at these issues in the course. And then the other is storytelling. Why do we tell these stories? And we actually look at ghost stories, and what we find is ghost stories are actually a form of resistance for a lot of communities. A lot of the ghost stories in Kentucky, for example, are written about enslaved persons or about women or about indigenous communities. And so they're a form of people sort of pushing against those systems of power and disrupting notions that these hierarchies are somehow fixed. So we look at those kinds of things in this class, but we go to haunted places. We stay at a haunted hotel.
I think I've heard of the hotel.
Yep. We had stayed at a haunted hotel. We actually, the last time I taught it, we did meet with some local paranormal investigators and checked out a couple places. It was, in terms of, like your ghost hunters type experience, maybe, I don't know if it was exciting as what you see on TV, but it was great to think about the ways in which we assign meaning to certain spaces. And if a space has a ghost story or ghosts associated with it, what does that mean? Like, how do we relate to those spaces? And then when we put these stories in their historical contexts, like, okay, so if there's there's lots of stories in Kentucky about women who jumped off bridges or something like that. There's lovers, they're scorned by them or something. These are terrible stories. But like, if we actually put this into context, we can actually start to see that these stories come out of increasing demands for women's equality and rights. That's interesting. So then we can actually look at what is going on that is fueling these kinds of stories or these kinds of meanings. And it's just a blast. I had probably the most fun I ever had teaching that course because the students in the end researched their own ghost stories and then performed them as storytellers. And it was lovely. I just cannot, they're so great. They're so much fun. And so it was that kind of where you take a topic and you can really get into it and find these unexpected things. I also do think, though, there's something about dealing with the unknown. I mean, do ghosts exist? I actually tell the students that's not the point of the class, is for me to decide, to show you yes or no. It's the fact that we are interested in them, in these unknown things and the unanswerable questions, that I love to sort of bring that out. I think that's just great. So that is a class I love. I took students to France and Belgium and Germany with my colleague, Ian Wilson, and another colleague, Mindy Wilson, in another center term course. And we studied World War II, and we followed from the D-Day invasion at Normandy all the way to Berlin and the end of World War II. I mean, as a history nerd, I was just in heaven the entire time. It was amazing. I mean, so these are the kinds of, it's so hard for me to pick a favorite, but I can just tell you, in the experiences I've had, these are the experiences where I just feel so lucky to be doing what I get to do.
That's why I love center term so much. I think you don't even have to be a history major to take one of these classes, or you're able to sort of expand on what you're learning in the United States and take it abroad. And actually, that's so cool, walking from Normandy. And
yeah,
maybe I should hop on a center term trip again or something, try to be a chaperone or something like that.
I cannot wait to teach that class again, because it was it's one thing to talk about Omaha Beach and what that was like. And I have another course I've taught on campus where we read a lot of accounts, and we look at a lot of images and film evidence, and we do the work there. But it's another thing to actually stand on the sand and look at the water and think about what was going through the minds of those soldiers as they got out of their LSTs and swam for their lives, basically. I mean, it's just there's something about that kind of experience. And that's something else I'm really grateful for Center for allowing me to create a course that gives that to students. Is just unparalleled.
Yeah, for sure. Man, oh man, this is so cool. Now, I'm originally from a big city, so it took me some time to get used to the small town feel of Danville, but I grew to love it. So describe your impressions of the Danville community. Coming from South Dakota, you're used to this sort of small town feel, but how does it compare or sort of contrast?
Yeah, so I am from a town. It's about the size of Danville. It's a little smaller, but much more spread out in South Dakota. There's a lot of room and not as many people. So when I got here, actually, it didn't have the sort of disruptive feel of moving from a big place to a small place. It did feel different just because it was the first time I'd lived in a southern state. And so there were certain cultural or community things that people would talk about that I just didn't get. I just didn't know what they were, really meant. And so I've lived here now long enough that I at least kind of understand what people are talking about and their experiences. One of the things, though, that I really appreciate about Danville is that they're, just like Center, really welcoming. People in Danville are really welcoming. They're excited to have, young people coming into the community. They're excited to that energy that Center College brings with its faculty, students, and staff. I just think that that's something that I've really appreciated. The other thing is like Danville has a lot of opportunities that happen, and I think people don't realize. We have this amazing art center that's not very far from campus, and there's stuff going on there all the time. There's great parks. Our downtown is really growing and vibrant. There's lots of restaurants. There's lots of the Wisiger Park. They've got all these different things that they do. That's really, and especially I think as I had kids and I started to take advantage more of what would young people do? We have an amazing public library. I mean, just these kinds of things that it's sort of like people say, yeah, Danville's really cool. And then you actually start engaging with all the different parts of it. And you realize, no, this is like a treasure. It's like a sort of hidden gem in some ways.
Yes.
And so I've really, especially now that we've been here a little bit more and we've got a kind of network of friends and people that we connect with, there's always something to do. There's always a place to visit. The hiking, we're kind of big hikers, and the hiking around here is really, really great. And so we've been doing that, especially as there's been some curtailing of sort of indoor gatherings and stuff like that. We've done quite a bit of hiking, and you can drive 15 minutes, and it's just like, this is incredible, right? Get to do the hiking that we do.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
yeah, so the outdoor activities and the sort of different things going on, cultural activities, have been really a wonderful thing that we've engaged in.
Yeah, Danville definitely stole my heart eventually. I was like, wow, this is so nice. And you're talking about the hiking and stuff. I wasn't a huge hiker before, but getting to sort of visit all these places, I was like, wow, Kentucky has so much to offer. Not even just Danville, but Kentucky as a whole has so much to offer. Some people debate, they're like, oh, Kentucky's not Southern, it's Midwest. And I'm like, Southern to me. I mean, anywhere
People say that, I'm like, well, you haven't lived in the Midwest. Like,
right.
I don't know. I lived in Iowa for a number of years. I've lived South Dakota, North Dakota. I've been to a lot of Midwestern places. And to me, Kentucky does not feel like those places. I understand the other side where people, maybe they're from Mississippi or Alabama or something, and they say, oh, Kentucky is not the South. But I'm like, I don't know. I think actually it's a great debate. It's a great conversation of like meaning and assigning meaning to spaces. So certainly Kentucky straddles some sort of border. And I think that's really kind of, but it's also got its own personality, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, now we're in the time where we have plenty of free time. I mean, it's not only summer, but also we can't do much indoors and around people. So what hobbies consume most of your free time, pre or post pandemic?
Yeah. So I have two little kids, so a lot of my hobby time is kid time. So I play a lot of Candyland. I was thinking about this, and I'm like, my hobbies are not that exciting. No, but I mean, I do. I have a lot of fun with my kids. We like to go hiking. That's something that we've been trying to do more often, and especially as my kids are older and they can do more of the work themselves. That's kind of nice. Actually, I like to go run. I like to run. And Danville has a lot of really nice trails and places to run in town that I really appreciate, parks and stuff. And so I try to run. And then when I run, I listen to podcasts. I'm again, like kind of my nerd. I like to listen to things that aren't history necessarily, so I can learn new things. So I've enjoyed that. I would say if that counts as a hobby, running and listening to podcasts is something I do quite often. And when I do get a chance to do fun things that are not just, I garden. So I have a nice vegetable garden. I'm getting my second cucumber of the season, but there's so many of these little yellow flowers on my cucumber plants. I'm really excited. So gardening is something I love. Actually, a lot of just kind of food related things. I grew up in a community and in a family where we did a lot of gardening and canning and preserving. My dad was a hunter, is a hunter, and so we always had venison or deer. I don't hunt here myself, but that idea of like, really valuing where your food comes from, thinking about the ethics behind the food that we eat. It's another course I actually offer. I think it's farm to table or something that I called it, about food history. But that's something that actually personally I spend a lot of time engaging in food systems and sort of personally building or creating the foods that my family consumes. That's something that I enjoy to do. Just being outside. A lot of what I've described is outdoor activities. So, yeah.
I don't think I've ever had venison or deer.
Oh my gosh.
It made it this long without having any of those. But.
I grew up on it as a kid. I mean, I didn't understand. This sounds so, I'm like outing myself here, but there was a big, huge deep freeze. So my dad, we raised cattle. And so not a lot, just a few head, but I would go in and I didn't understand that there were these like there was deer, ground deer, and there was ground beef. And as a kid, I just would grab a package. My mom would say, go down and grab a package of whatever. And I just didn't realize there was a difference. I was older and I figured it out, right? Like, okay, they're different animals and they look different and they do different things. But, and then I, of course, thought that this is how everyone ate. Like, when you're going to have a meal, my mom would say, go down and get a can or a jar of beans that we had grown and we had canned, and then go into the deep freeze and get this package of meat that we butchered. We raised chickens. I'm very rural life, so I just didn't quite grasp that this was something that not a lot of people were still doing. And so so it makes me really appreciate the food systems that we have and my role and how I'm implicated in those.
Yeah.
So
what is a fun fact about you that your students might not know?
Okay, so this is, again, I'm kind of embarrassing myself, but okay. So one of my things that I loved and still love is music. And so when I was in high school and continued in college, I played the tuba, actually. And my senior year of high school, I was the first chair tuba player at our all-state band in South Dakota, which basically means that for those tuba players who auditioned for this, I was the top tuba player in South Dakota. And, and I continued to play in college. I just enjoyed it a lot. I always thought music was a great hobby. I still enjoy listening to music and performing from time to time, although I don't play tuba anymore, I have to say. I don't have one. But that is a fact that my students don't know because I don't volunteer it readily. So,
yeah, that's
usually I get a lot of strange faces anyway.
I would not have guessed that you were a tuba player, so that is
yes.
a fun fact.
No, people don't think that. And the funniest part to me is I played the tuba and my sister played the flute. I think she looked at me, she's younger than me, and I think she looked at me lugging around this massive tuba on the bus, or whatever. And she's like, yeah, no, I'm gonna go for a little small instrument. She was probably smarter, actually.
That's okay. What is one thing you hope never changes about Center?
I think the point that I made earlier about community, the invitation to come, the acceptance, that's really, I think, something that I would never, and in fact, I would want to strengthen it, continue to strengthen, right? That we're accepting of all people, that we get to know people as a whole people with all their different identities and ideas. That is something at my core, and I think at Center's core is being open, being inviting, and establishing a community, regardless of who you are and where you came from. I think that's really important. So, and I think that that's something that Center does well. And I also think that Center continues to emphasize that and do the things it needs to do. And I hope that it continues to.
Yeah, for sure. We just got a new president yesterday.
Yes.
Yes. So I hope the same. I hope that it continues, and not only continues but amplifies. So
exactly.
I think based on the faculty, staff, and students that are at Center, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite place on campus?
So the Sinking Spring is probably my favorite place, and not a lot of people realize it's there. It's kind of between Cowan, and then you walk up the hill toward Old Center, and then Main Street is right along the side, and it's right in there. And actually, so I teach environmental history, and it's something I do on the first day. I ask the students, why is Center where it is? And a lot of students are like, I don't know. I've never thought about that before. And so they start to think, well, maybe it's because of is it flat here? Well, not really, kind of, but also not. Or its location, proximity to downtown Danville, and all these different things. But eventually I try to get them to figure out, like, the reason is because of the Sinking Spring, because it had water there, and it was a water source. And this is a place where people will then settle and establish themselves. And it was already a pretty well-known place in the area that you could go and you could get water. And so it makes sense that Center would organize itself in its first buildings around the Sinking Spring, in fact. So I actually really love it. There's benches there. It's quiet, remarkably quiet for being almost in the middle of campus, right next to a major road. You sort of go down into it, and it's just kind of the sound sort of evaporates in some ways. And then it's just beautiful. It kind of comes out of the ground and you can see the water flowing across the rocks, and there's a bridge. I've taken my kids down there quite often, especially when there's been a lack of other activities to do. And they just sort of, you just see this, like the way in which we live our lives, how we gravitate towards certain things, certain sounds, like the flow of water over rocks or the quiet spaces. My kids, they just sort of fall silent, and they sort of just, bend down and they start putting their hands in the water. They just sort of observe it. I don't know. To me, there's this peaceful moment that you can capture when you go there. So, and I like the fact that not a lot of people go there. I think more people should appreciate it and take time to go there. But it allows me to have this kind of brief moment of tranquility. If I'm having a really stressful day or a really busy day, I can sort of wander down there and take a minute.
Yeah, that's one place I don't think I visited enough.
Oh, it's great. It's sort of hidden, like I said, and it's a lot of fun to go down there and check it out and think about the history of it, what it represents about Kentucky and the landscape of Kentucky, and why Center is sort of built up surrounding this spring. It's kind of fun. So
I think 2 center grads recently got married there. So
that, yeah, I don't know, but that doesn't surprise me. It's a beautiful location. It's gorgeous, and like I said, it's really kind of a place to sort of center yourself.
Yeah, very cool. What nugget of advice would you offer a first-year student?
Oh gosh, I don't know how to like say this, because I want you to say yes when people say, "Hey, do you want to hang out with so and so, or do you want to go check out this game, or do you want to go watch the boys basketball?" Like, say yes. Mm-hmm. But then, like, the other side of this is don't say yes to things you actually don't care about, right? Like, in some ways, my advice is like, a college allows you to figure out what your core values are and build your integrity. So saying yes allows you to figure out what you value, and then it allows you to say no when you need to say no, when it's appropriate. So that's why it's not just say yes all the time, and it's not just say no. It's like figure out what your integrity is, what drives you, and what you want to surround yourself with doing, but say yes to get to that point.
Yeah. I think Center offers a lot of different opportunities to figure out what you're going to say yes to, or what you're going to say no to. So that's a great piece of advice. And what wisdom would you share with a graduating senior on the other side of things?
Oh, my wisdom is that you do not have everything figured out, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, your life is long, and you've got a lot of opportunities, and it's okay to feel like you don't know what you're going to do. That's actually almost a good place to be in. Like, you should kind of embrace it in some ways.
So, I feel like I need to clip out this snippet and share it with the class of 2020, because under the circumstances that they graduated under, and I'm sure they definitely need to hear that. So that's a great piece of advice as well.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, I kind of knew what I was going to do. I knew graduate school, but like really specifically what I was going to do, no, I had no idea. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. I think in some ways that kind of the first thing, like saying yes, continuing to say yes to opportunities, but hopefully, also as you progress through college, you started to really figure out what you value and where your true purpose lies. I think that's something that resonated with me when I read the new President Moreland's remarks that he delivered, or that he sent out, that it's a purpose-driven education. And I think that's something that's really been sticking with me, is that you may not have all the answers, you may not have anything figured out, but if you figured out sort of that purpose, what are the things that drive you, and what are the things that you want to devote in your life, you get one. So, so if you can kind of think through those things, the details are not as important. You get there.
Exactly. Yes. Now, on the flip side of things, this is not a serious question at all, but no baked cookies in Cowan or soft serve ice cream. Which one would you choose? It's a tough question.
Well, this is actually maybe the hardest question you've asked me. Um, gosh, if I actually look at this as if I could only eat one for the rest of my life,
Ooh,
that's how I have decided. It would be no bake cookies. I mean,
really?
yeah, yeah. I just can't. I There's something about, and like I love to bake and I love to make everything from scratch or as much as I can from scratch. So I actually like the idea, the time in the intention of baking cookies for people I love, and in that sort of first cookie out of the oven, the no bake. I don't know. To me, I know these are no bake cookies, so there's no oven involved. But to me, that cookie and what it symbolizes is why I think I choose it.
Yeah, oh man. Yeah, no bake Wednesday was always a great day in Cowan. So,
Oh,
but the
yeah,
soft serve on a hot day too was that's the
I know. I know. See, this is the hard part. Like, would I actually want to give up one? No, of course I want my soft serve ice cream. Like, are you kidding me?
oh my God,
But
both on the same day. Like it's yeah, it's a
you
lot.
just sort of like, thank you, universe. Thank you.
Yeah. um, so my last question for you is to name another Senate professor that you would like to have taught you or as an undergrad and why.
Also, I don't know if I can pick just one. I am constantly amazed and almost to the point of like speechlessness of how amazing the other faculty are here. Um, I'm not going to just name one, sorry. So Dr. Axtell, Rick Axtell, like totally would. Dr. Mary Daniels,
Had no,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, just incredible. Um, Dr. Preston Miles is another one. I really wish I would have had him as an undergrad. I think I would have loved it. My own department, I mean, I'm surrounded by incredible teachers, incredible scholars, Dr. Tubb, Dr. Bodwin, Dr. Straub, I mean, I can name them. It would take me a while. So all of them would be just, I would love to take classes from them. Gosh. And then there's people I hear about, but haven't taught with them or at the same time that they were here. Dr. Garriott, Dr. Newhall, Dr. Lee, all these people whose names just resonate, and they're sort of these titans here. I would have loved to sit in one of those classes. And as you know, I loved college. So if I could just do that again and be on the student side, it would be incredible. So yeah, one of my goals is actually to start, I think we can start auditing we can audit classes as faculty. And that's one of my goals is I want to see if I can start sitting in on some of these courses with these professors that I so admire.
Yeah, I was just about to suggest that. I think that would
Yeah.
be cool. Even like a
Yeah.
conference, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I just, to me, like podcasts are my way of learning other things from other people. And like one of my favorites is Radio Lab. They do a lot of science-based reporting. And I am not I mean, I love science. I don't understand it as well as I do other subjects. So I just find this so fascinating. So if I could just sit in like Dr. Peggy Ritchie's bio courses or something, like I'm just any of those professors, I just think I would sit there and be like, this is so interesting. I had no idea about all this stuff. So that would be great. I would love that. So yeah, that's one of if I can find a way to incorporate that into my schedule, I would love to do that. It's a real, I mean, I think as a student, if I could look at the survey of courses and act like that's my job is to just take classes, sign me up. It's amazing.
A lot of professors that I've had, so consider myself fortunate. I guess I've had the right
Yeah,
ones.
it'd be so wonderful.
Awesome, that's cool. Well, just from our conversation today, and based on what I've heard from Senator Loves and stuff, I can tell I would have loved a class with you as well. So, thank you for joining me today. I would say Senator is definitely lucky to have you, and I hope our future colonels will also get the opportunity to engage with you, whether that be in a lecture or alongside you with research or anything like that. Reading your book, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much again, Dr. Egge.
Thank you. It's been great to talk with you.
Awesome. Oh. Mm-mm-mm.